This is the story of the house of one of the most famous U.S. presidential families. I'm the NYC Traveler, and we're at Springwood in Hyde Park, New York. Welcome to Springwood, the home of the 32nd President of the United States, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, commonly known as FDR. The longest-serving U.S. president called this house from the time he was born until the time he died home, although he actually passed away in Georgia, ironically. FDR's father, James Roosevelt, bought the house and property in 1866 and added to the estate with a carriage house and more rooms. By 1915, his second wife, Sarah, FDR's mother, and FDR himself further renovated the house to reflect both his growing family and political career. Having married Eleanor in 1905, the young couple eventually had 6 children, raising them and some of the grandchildren at Springwood. Sarah also continued living there, dying in 1941, just 4 years before her son. After meeting near the carriage house, the tour of the mansion begins on the first floor of the house, but it was upstairs in this room that FDR was born January 30th, 1882. His mother was advised not to have any more children, so FDR was an only child. He was ambitious, and by many accounts, his mother was ambitious for him. Some biographies have her so prominent in his life that Eleanor never felt comfortable in the house. Hence the building of Val Kill, her home for a large part of her life. FDR's extramarital affairs, with letters as proof, also contributed to the Roosevelts leading almost separate lives by 1918. Yet, despite these issues, they continued to work together to support FDR as he served as a New York State Senator, Assistant Secretary of the Navy, Governor of New York State, and finally, President of the United States. In fact, we could arguably call the Roosevelts a modern example of the team of President and First Lady, since Eleanor was active not only with him politically, but in social and civil rights causes. Before or after the mansion tour, you can learn all about this and more at the Presidential Library and Museum and at Val Kill. In August 2021, Franklin fell ill with what was diagnosed as polio. He was paralyzed, leaving him without the use of his legs for the rest of his life. Despite this, he continued with his political ambitions. It was considered a well-kept but well-publicized secret. He was trying to never be seen as ill in public, but everyone knew. He learned how to move his legs as if he were walking, supported by canes and leg braces. Any ramps that accommodated his wheelchair were folded up out of sight of visitors. He would already be seated in a room when visitors came to see him at Springwood, never leaving until the visitor left, so that he could be assisted. An elevator was installed in Springwood after he was diagnosed. Despite the Roosevelts' marital issues, Eleanor nursed FDR after his illness was diagnosed and supported his decision to stay in politics, even though she was not crazy about the idea. As a result, the Roosevelts and Springwood hosted many dignitaries, including the King and Queen of the United Kingdom in 1939. 2 years before his death, Roosevelt left the house, library, and estate to the American people, except Val Kill. The condition was that family members had a right to use it during their lifetime, but they relinquished those rights by November 1945. Roosevelt is the first president to create a presidential library, and he did so while he was still president. His actual office was not in the house, but at the library. You'll probably start the partially guided tour on the first floor. The house is almost exactly as it was when he last stayed here, about 2 weeks before he died. The Roosevelts collected many objects. The collection of these objects makes this part of the house almost seem like a museum upon entering. You'll also note that some of the items have features of nature FDR did have an interest in nature, similar to his distant cousin, Teddy Roosevelt, whom he idolized after his father died. Teddy was older and was the uncle of Eleanor. Roosevelt was 29 years old when this sculpture was done. Ironically, it shows no legs on it, almost foreshadowing his illness. Roosevelt was known for having a famous nautical object collection. Some of that is housed at the library. Other objects in this area will be political cartoons, some of which were of the British, which was of great interest to King George VI when he visited. It is said that he stood and read almost every one and remarked that this collection was better than his collection of British political cartoons. By nature of his job in politics, the Roosevelts hosted many dignitaries, many politicians, and many associates here at Springwood. The dining room table looks cozy here, but it could be expanded to hold many more. As the placard states, the music room, also known as the Dresden Room, was redecorated for the King George VI and Queen's visit of the United Kingdom and the dominions of the British Commonwealth. The room contains articles not only of Dresden porcelain, but also of Chinese porcelain and lacquer. Along with the dining room, the music room served as a place to entertain the Roosevelts' guests. The walkway or hallway from the music room to the library is called the gallery. Since we already know that Sarah Delano Roosevelt, FDR's mother, was a controversial figure in Eleanor and Roosevelt's marriage, it's no surprise that she stayed there and lived there after they got married. She managed the house from this room called the Snuggery. It was her personal office. The heart of the first floor is the living room/library. This is where FDR had most of his objects of his collections. This room does showcase the Roosevelt and Delano families' wealth that they had at the time. But at the same time, there was a comfort to the room because it was obvious that it was one of FDR's favorite rooms. Before your tour guide escorts you to the second floor for the other part of the tour, make sure you take a note of all of the technology that was there at the time. At the time that we were there, the rest of the rooms on the first floor, the pantry, the kitchen, the coat room, the servants' dining room, and FDR's study in the house were not part of the tour. After the presidential library was built, he used the study that was there. Also, the third floor was not part of the tour when we were there, but there's a layout and photos that show you the rooms of the children of FDR and Eleanor when they lived there at Springwood. FDR, remember, was an only child, so his childhood room is on the second floor. Across the hall, with a great view of the back of the property, is the Pink Room. Many important guests, such as the King of England, slept in this room. Next door to the Pink Room was the Chintz Room, which indeed was decorated as such. Across from these two rooms is the room where FDR himself was born. FDR was born in what is called the Blue Room. It doesn't look blue now because Sarah moved into another bedroom after the new wing was added, and that one is actually blue. But after she died, her furniture that was in the new Blue Room was moved back to the original Blue Room. Down the hall and around the corner is Sarah's room that she had when she lived here with Eleanor and FDR. It is one of the bigger rooms of the house, and it also has a beautiful view of the front. As you can see, Eleanor moved into this room after FDR became ill. Unfortunately, it put her right next door to her mother-in-law. It was smaller than FDR's bedroom and Sarah's bedroom, and since it's in between the two bedrooms, and since there's a reason why houses were designed like this back in the day, it's a possibility that it was used for another purpose before. At the back of the house on the second floor was FDR's room. If Sarah had a good view of the front of the property, and Eleanor in the middle room had actually a nice view of the side of the property and toward the Hudson River, FDR liked this room because of the view. It was the back of the house, but at the time, you could see the Hudson River before the trees that were planted there grew to block the view. Next door to this master bedroom was the large walk-in closet, or probably what would be called the dressing room. It is possible that Franklin and Eleanor might have shared this room because the door that was in Eleanor's room was actually a connecting door between her room and Franklin's room. Despite the fact that there are several bedrooms up here on the second floor, there was only one bathroom that we could see. Up here, the guide will be here to answer any questions, but it is mostly a self-guided tour so that you can get an idea of how the Roosevelts lived. After you have toured this area, you take the back staircase down to the back of the property to see for yourself the view that Franklin saw from his bedroom. At this point, the formal tour of the mansion would be over, but there's always the carriage house and the gardens and FDR's gravesite that we're going to be headed to next. The building directly in front of you has visitors' facilities, such as a restroom and a waiting area with a video presentation. You actually meet your tour guide here, so if you are early, you can tour the carriage house on your own while you wait. If you have finished the house tour already, you can exit through the back of the carriage house and head toward the gardens if you haven't seen them already, and the grave sites are also in that direction. There's a lot more to the historic site, but we're going to cover that in another video. A good way to end the tour of the mansion is with the memorial area. FDR died in Georgia in a town called Warm Springs, the town he started going to after his polio diagnosis. The town was known literally for their warm springs, and he thought that the water would help him. His cottage there was known as the Little White House. After he died, he was brought back here to his home in Hyde Park, New York. In 1962, Eleanor died in New York City, and she too was brought back here to be buried. Joining the Roosevelts in their final resting place are two of their dogs, Chief and Fela. I'm the NYC Traveler, and we've been touring Springwood, the home of Franklin Delano Roosevelt, at Hyde Park, at the historic site in New York.